Okay, so today we are continuing with the book of Nehemiah. Still don't think I'm going to finish it today, but we'll continue with it. This is Nehemiah 5. We're in the middle of the account of them rebuilding the wall. Remember, we got basically an overall summary of the account in chapter 3 about who built what parts of the wall, and they were doing that all simultaneously all around the city. And now here in chapters 4 and 5, we're reading about various trouble that they had. In chapter 4, we read about the external threat, the opposition around them, from the people around them, and now in chapter 5, we're going to read about the internal problems they were having. Not only were they just overwhelmed by the task ahead of them, which we read about in chapter 4, just, oh my goodness, we're never going to be able to get this done, but there were specific problems that were developing within the community that they had to deal with. Nehemiah chapter 5. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Basically, those guys have a problem in that they're in the city building this wall, so they're not out in their fields sitting to their harvest, sitting to their food supply, so they're running out of food. Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." So they were having to sell their property to people, actually as it turns out to other Jewish people, their brothers, in order to survive. And still others were saying, "We have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs." So they're borrowing money from fellow Jews. They're not borrowing it from outsiders or from foreigners. Yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery because we don't have any money to pay the tax with. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and vineyards belong to others. So other Jews, they've sold their fields and vineyards to other Jews. This is an internal problem. These are not external enemies that are pressuring them or that they're dealing with. These are internal problems. Some of them have had to sell their property to fellow Jews, and they're not getting enough. They don't have relief from the king's tax to be able to pay, so they're handing over their children instead. Some of their daughters have already been enslaved. That word "enslaved" in the original has sexual connotations behind it, so they're being sold off into marriages and other families and to other people around them because they have to get money somehow to live. And they're not. Another issue going on here is that because they're busy in the city building this temple or building this wall, they're not out getting their grain from the fields, so they're going hungry. When I heard their outcry, this is Nehemiah speaking again, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind, and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, "You are exacting usury from your own countrymen," which they weren't supposed to do. These are fellow Jews. These are not foreigners. The rules were different from dealing with fellow Jews compared to dealing with foreigners. Some of this stuff would have been permissible if they were dealing with foreigners, but not when they're dealing with fellow countrymen, fellow Jews, Israelites, now known as Jews. The word Jew itself comes from Judahite. Okay, so you had the nation of Israel, which was the whole 12 tribes of Israel, sons of Jacob, and the families that came from them. Then that split into two, into the northern kingdom, which kept the name Israel, and eventually became dominated by the tribe of Ephraim, and the southern kingdom, which was basically Judah, with Benjamin and some Levites in there, and maybe Simeon, some mixture. And then when Israel was taken captive by Assyria, and they kind of were lost to history. And then Judah was conquered by Babylon and taken to Babylon. And it was during that time when they developed a very distinctive lifestyle. When they didn't have the temple and the priesthood operating, they substituted a lot of their temple and priesthood customs for a religious mixture that we call Judaism. So the term Jew itself kind of grew out of this time of the descendants of Judah, the remnant of Judah, who have a national identity as children of Judah, but also a religious identity that they adopted during their time in captivity when they did not have a functioning temple or priesthood. So, anyway. So at any rate, they were not supposed to treat their fellow countrymen, Israelites or Jews, this way. So, because the problem is not with foreigners. The problem is not with strangers in the land who are buying their fields or buying their daughters. It's their fellow brothers, their countrymen, that are doing it. I told them, you are exacting usury from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. And I said, this is happening presumably while they're building the wall. They have to take the time out to stop doing that so they can do this instead. And I said, as far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. Sometimes the best thing to do when you're being accused of wrongdoing is just to be quiet. Sometimes, it's not always maybe the best thing to do to immediately speak up in your defense and say, hey now, listen to me here. We got a lot of people who probably should learn that lesson during COVID, huh? A lot of people were very, very wrong on a lot of things about COVID. But instead of simply admitting it, instead of acknowledging, hey, we didn't know what we were talking about, we had bad advice, bad ideas, we got caught up in the moment, we did a lot of things that we regret we shouldn't have done. Instead of doing that, they got to continue defending themselves. They got to continue digging their own hole. So I continue. So Nehemiah has an opportunity here. The people who are guilty of this are not defending themselves. They're not trying to say that they didn't do it. They did. So I continue. What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the money people and grain. But let the exacting of money, of usury, stop. I don't know if he was as guilty with this as some of the others were, or if he was simply lending without forcing, I don't know. At any rate, he's admitting that he did some of this himself. He was lending money and grain to the people. But I don't know if he was exacting usury from them, but even if he was, he's going to stop it, and he's going to get the other powerful people to stop it too. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the usury you are charging them, the 100th part of the money, grain, new wine, and oil. We will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe, and that's basically his pockets, okay? I don't know exactly how they had their robes designed back then, but the folds are basically pockets. So he's basically emptying his pockets here. You could think of it as though he's reaching in and just pulling out everything that's in his pockets. So he shakes out the folds of his robes and said, in this way, may God shake out of his house and possessions every man who does not keep this promise. So may such a man be shaken out and emptied. May you be reduced to an empty pocket, in other words. At this, the whole assembly said, Amen, and praise the Lord. So they lend their agreement to what Nehemiah said here. And the people did as they had promised. Moreover, from the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, until his 32nd year, 12 years, that's the time of his governorship. We'll find out later he was called back to Artaxerxes at that time. Neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. So he had an allowance as governor that he was entitled to, but he did not take advantage of it. But the earlier governors, those preceding me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them, in addition to food and wine. Their associates also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. These are probably non-Jewish governors. The only other one that we really know for certain, or the most recent one, was Zerubbabel. There was a guy named Sheshbazzar that came with him out of Persia or out of Babylon back to Judah. and he seems to have disappeared pretty quickly. He'd been replaced by Zerubbabel, and he was the guy there in the time of them building the temple, which you read about in Haggai and Zechariah and early in Ezra. But then after him, there would have been a long gap of 50 years or so of governors who probably weren't Jews, who probably were not. Zerubbabel was a descendant of the line of David. He was the grandson of Jeconiah, the last living king of Judah. So he was and he would have been king if they had still had a kingdom. He was a fully qualified member of the royal line. But after him, it doesn't appear as though Judah was ruled by royalty from the line of David. Nehemiah I don't think was royalty from the line of David. He was appointed governor by the kings of Persia. And I don't know how long Zerubbabel was governor, but it appears that after him, however long he lasted as governor, it appears that after him, this territory, Judah, was ruled by governors that came and went at the king of Persia's appointment. So they're not being ruled by, if they were, it probably would be a little bit too risky. If you have a line of successive rulers coming from the royal line of David, that would probably be seen as a threat to the king of Persia who controls this territory. So, at any rate, we had one, Zerubbabel, but after that it appears as though we've had a series of non-Jewish governors that were appointed by the king of Persia. Until Nehemiah, who was also appointed by the king of Persia, but is not a member. He's a Jew, at least. But I don't think he's a member of the line of David. There's no indication of that whatsoever. Their assistants also lorded over the people, but out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All my men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire any land. Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table, as well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor, because the demands were heavy on these people. Remember me with favor, O my God, all I have done for these people. Yeah, let's continue reading. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, although at the time I had not set the doors and the gates, so there's still a little bit left to do. Oh no. This is bad. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. They want to get him out of the way so they can kill him. And Nehemiah knows this. They're not interested in a legitimate conversation with Nehemiah. Oh boy, this is going to be very bad. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message. And each time I gave them the same answer. You'd think they'd get the hint, wouldn't you? Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written. An unsealed letter means it's open for all to read. It's going to be a public proclamation. He wants the people to know about this. It is reported amongst the nations, and Geshem, the Arab, says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and you therefore are building the wall. So he's saying that you're going to fight against the king of Persia. Remember, Egypt was in rebellion at this time. I mentioned that back when I got through Ezra. One of the reasons why Artaxerxes is giving Ezra and Nehemiah this authority to shore up Jerusalem is because he wants a strong ally and fortification in this area to help deal with rebellions coming from Egypt, for example. So Ezra and Nehemiah have to be loyal to Persia in order to continue having favor of the Persian king. And this guy's saying that's not happening, that they're going to be fomenting their own rebellion soon. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now, this report will get back to the king, so come, let us confer together. I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. One day, I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was shut in at his home. Don't know why, but he just was. He said, let us meet in the house of God, inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. Then I said, should a man like me run away? Or should one like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me, so he was speaking as a prophet, a false prophet here, not sent from God. But he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. So he might have had some reputation for being a prophet before this, maybe, but he's been hired by the bad guys to issue a message. Nehemiah can't go into the temple because he's not a priest. Him going into the temple would discredit his authority in the eyes of the priests and the rest of the people. So he can't go into the temple. So he knows that a genuine prophet of God would never tell him to do something that goes against the revealed will of God, which is that only priests can go in the temple. So he's not going to fall for it. Now it could be that this Shemaiah might have been at one time a prophet of God and had a reputation for that. I don't know. Even if he had been, he clearly has lost that status now by accepting this task from the enemies to prophesy for hire. But I said, should a man like me run away, or should one like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, and that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, because Nehemiah could not go into the temple. And then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, O my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophetess, Noadiah, it's a lady prophet, Noadiah, and the rest of the prophets who have been trying to intimidate me. So this Shemaiah guy was not the only one. There was a lady named Noadiah and some other dudes who don't get named that were also trying to intimidate Nehemiah and get him to stop. They did not want this wall built. Some of these people would have been there in the city with him, like this Shemaiah dude, who was shut in at his house for some reason. Nehemiah had to go to him. You know, it's like, because, and part of that would have been because these family relations that they would have had from their days having been married to those foreign wives from previously. And so there would have been a lot of ties outside of the city with people groups around them. And that would have compromised quite a few of the people in the city. And Nehemiah was always going to have to keep an eye out for who may have been working for the enemy in a way, or at the very least had divided loyalties. There may have been a number of people in the city who genuinely wanted the wall built, but who also had loyalties to families or tribes or clans or people outside the city too. That would have been the case as well. So Nehemiah had a lot of these things to deal with. He had internal discouragement and internal strife and conflict, and external threats and intimidation and coercion. And he has got to keep his head on the game. He has got to keep focused on getting the task done. Because if it doesn't get done now, it'll never get done. They've been back in the land for 90 years. It hasn't gotten done yet. If they don't get it done now, it's never going to get done. This wall is going to stay in. You know, some of that wall is still in rubble. You know, they didn't rebuild the entire wall. Parts of the wall that were left behind from the previous invasion of Babylon were left there, and they built a different wall. Like they shrunk the size of the city. Some of those heaps of rubble are still there to this day. That's how large a project this was, or would have been at the time. Even today, 2,500 years later, we can't get around to clearing out some of the rubble that's been there since the fall of the city at the hands of Babylon. So, okay, but they finally do it. We're going to finally read about them finishing this wall in the next video.